This program is brought to you by Emory University.
There's one thing I wanted to say which we haven't talked about, which is the enormous influence in our time of films on serious writers. You know, that the adaptation is not always book into film. It's the fact that writers in our time have been very shaped by the experience of cinema. You know, I mean, certainly I have. You know, and I felt, first of all, I grew up in a movie city. You know, I grew up in a city which makes more movies than Hollywood, less than Hong Kong, but nobody's perfect. You know, and if you grow up in Bombay, you see movies being made more or less every day. You know, it's all around you. You know, and I had members of my family who were involved in the Bombay cinema as writers, as performers, and so on. So it's in your blood, you know, if you grow up in that way. Also, in those days, more than now, Western movies, American movies, used to get to India very quickly, very quickly. That's to say, many of the big studios here had connections with individual movie theaters in Bombay. So there was a movie theater called the Metro, you know, which showed MGM movies. There was one called the Eros, which showed Paramount. There was one called the Regal, which showed Universal, and so on. So you would get first-run American films very soon. I mean, very soon after their original release. So you were able to be involved in what was happening in American cinema, as well as what was happening in Indian cinema. And so I was, you know, I mean, I was a big reader as a kid, but like everybody else of my age, generation, was obsessed by movies. And then when I was in England growing up, going to college, I mean, I've always thought it was incredibly good fortune for me to have been there at the time when world cinema exploded. You know, and that 20 years from the mid-50s to the mid-70s, you know, when the greatest movies were being made everywhere, sort of not really in America, they were being made all over the world. And I've often tried to write about how hard it is to communicate what it meant when these films, which we now think of as the great classics of the silent cinema, were that week's new movies. You know, you go to the cinema and it's showing La Dolce Vita, you know, and the next week it's showing Bergman's The Seventh Seal, and the week after that it's showing the new Kurosawa movie, and the week after that the new Satyajit Ray movie, and the week after that maybe there's, you know, an Altman or you know, something, but just the excitement in the cinema was so intense in that period. So much was being tried and invented and experimented with very successfully, you know, that if you were at all interested in telling stories, you know, you would learn a lot from that. And I certainly feel that my work has been enormously influenced by going to the cinema, you know, and continues to be. So in a way, it's although I haven't done this, what was suggested, which is to do a novelization of a movie, but I do think that a lot of my books owe a lot to the kinds of storytelling that one would learn. I mean, to take Fellini, for example, I mean, I thought, when I was trying to write Midnight's Children, to look at those movies that Fellini made about his boyhood, you know, I Vitelloni, later Amarcord, to show how you could make films which took the material of childhood, of an ordinary childhood, and make it fantastic and mythological and much, much larger than life. I thought, you know, I could steal that. I think if you're going to steal the good stuff. It's always been my rule. You know, steal the silver, don't steal the plate. And so I felt very affected by the experience of watching Fellini movies. And many other filmmakers.
And that's throughout history, too. I mean, apparently Dos Passos was influenced to write his USA trilogy after meeting Sergei Eisenstein when Eisenstein was in America. And, of course, Eisenstein and Joyce had some correspondence about all that. So you're in a great, grand tradition.
And the movies are now old enough. You know, we've had over a century of movies that you could actually look at a long period of time during which there's been this interaction between the forms, And it has been both ways.
Yeah.
You know, it has been both ways, and we tend to think of it as only going one way, you know, because there isn't the specific act of adapting a film into a book, you know.
Right.
But there is all the time the more general act of writers being strongly influenced by things they've seen in movies and wanting to do something like that in a book, you know.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.